There was a certain light about Dominic Passantino. I was his roommate when we arrived as freshmen at the University of Missouri in the Sigma Chi house. Living with Dom probably gave me a better insight than anyone else to his personality. If ever there was a genuinely friendly, likable guy, it was Dom. Everybody loves Dom was an appropriate description in this case, and he in turn genuinely loved people. In May of 1999, following the last day of exams and before returning home, he had a final night out. But at that time, none of us could have ever imagined that that would be his last night. Those of us who lived through the horror of his death and the feelings of helplessness and grief that resulted from it will never forget that time. Even today, many of the brothers in our chapter who experienced this tragedy firsthand will still ask themselves how and why these circumstances combined as they did to lead to Dom's death. I can say with certainty that I still do.
As a pledge brother of Dominic's, I was surprised when he roomed with John Crawford, a sophomore, the second semester of that year. It's unusual for a second-year man to room with a freshman, but Dominic and John were old friends from high school. I also think our officers hoped that a more mature influence could bring a bit more of balance to Dom's focus on college life. Dom and John slept in a bunk bed, which they had enclosed with drywall, leaving only a small entry opening at each level. On the night Dom died, he attended a bottomless cup event at a local bar, accompanied by a forged ID. For $7, he could drink all he wanted till the bar closed at 1:30, and he took full advantage of the offer. Dom came back to the Sigma Chi house, finding a bottle of bourbon in a member's room, and continued drinking. About 4:30 a.m., he fell into his bed, on which he had piled clothes for packing the next day. John, from the bunk below, heard him talking to his girlfriend on the phone and smelled a scented candle which Dom had lighted, setting it on the lid of a shoebox resting in his bed. The last thing John said to him was, "Dom, be sure to blow the candle out before you fall asleep." John awoke sometime later to the searing heat of flames above him, the stifling presence of smoke, and the screams of Dominic. The fire in his enclosure was too intense to get near the opening, as the candle had fallen and ignited the clothes lying at the entrance. John ran into the hall where the fire extinguisher should have been. It was gone. There was nothing he could do but listen to Dominic die. You can imagine the impact that this has had on John's life, something that must live with him virtually every day.
My phone rang shortly before 6 that morning, and I remember saying to myself that I hoped nothing was wrong at the fraternity. The voice on the line was the fire marshal telling me there had been a fire at the Sigma Chi house. He then added, there also has been a fatality. As you can imagine, the next few hours are hazy in my recollection. I was rather numb, realizing that in the corner room of our chapter house lay the remains of what, just a day before, had been a happy, vibrant young man. When I got to the house, the rest of the chapter was being rounded up out of sleeping rooms and was being put on a bus to take them to a central site where counselors already awaited. Some were half-dressed, some only wrapped in sheets, nearly all crying. I must admit that I was horrified that I might have to inform Dominic's parents of the tragedy, but was assured by the fire department that they would do that. The greatest frustration I felt was that during that day and in later weeks, I could do little to help the boys. We offered them professional counseling. They refused. Each had absorbed grief in his own way. Each wanted to deal with its impact in his own way. A quietness and underlying sorrow had settled on our fraternity, and I was powerless in terms of easing the pain. Such, I guess, is the sort of wall that young men can build around themselves. The pain burrows deep and isn't released till a long time afterward, if at all.
When the fire and the death were reported to me the day following the disaster, I knew there would be a lawsuit. The floor-to-ceiling sleeping enclosure with only a small exit opening was an obvious fire trap. This type of sleeping structure was against our rules, but had not been objected to, although it had been there all semester. The missing fire extinguisher, the report that the house alarm did not sound, and the horrible circumstances all added up to the perfect lawsuit. The case was further aggravated by the claim that the fire extinguishers were empty because of duels fought with them by exuberant brothers earlier in the evening. The suit named every one plaintiff's lawyer could think of: the active chapter, the chapter advisor, the national fraternity, and the House Corporation. The only relief was that it did not name the university and the individual directors of the House Corporation, as it well might have. It was an appalling situation. Because of the potential for huge damages, I worked for an out-of-court settlement. The Sigma Chi Risk Management Foundation stood behind us, and we were able to convince plaintiff's lawyer that settling out of court was a better result than dragging Dominic's family through the public revelation of his drinking that night, and particularly the gruesome details of his death.